Hello, welcome to my channel. My name is Hannah and let's talk books. So this has been another strange reading month for me, but in a different way than normal. Basically from August 1st to 16th, I read 6 books, and that's really good for me. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, am I gonna keep up this momentum? And the answer to that is absolutely not. From the 17th to the 31st, I finished 1 book. So I really don't know what happened, but I felt like I was reading all the time and then I just fucking stopped. I just was not interested, didn't really want to pick things up. It's been a bit strange. I feel like that might be about to change again. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's just because the start of a new month or something. Like, I don't know, but I only have 7 titles to talk about today, so let's jump right into it with the first one, which is Vicious by V.E. Schwab. This is an adult sci-fi fantasy. It came out in 2013, and I gave this 4 stars. So this book is essentially the origin story of 2 characters named Victor and Eli. They were 2 college roommates, and they basically take their experiments to the life or death level. This is a villain origin story. It does have like superpowers and things like that. I can't remember the name that they called. Oh yeah, now I remember. They called them extraordinaries, people who have these powers, but it's not like a widely known phenomenon. So this is a book I've been interested for a long time, but I never picked up because I wasn't exactly the biggest fan of her other book, Addie LaRue, and so I was kind of scared this was going to be written like that. But I am pleased to say the 2 are absolutely nothing alike. So if you were like me and Addie LaRue kind of put you off to her other work, don't worry, it is written completely different. This one definitely had me hooked into the story from page 1, and I've been really burnt out by like Marvel superheroes lately, so I did feel like it was nice to see a villain story. For me, this book is all about the characters. They all feel very like individual, they have unique personalities, but they also feel real, which is pretty important. But they are basically a group of like found family, and I found it very easy to fall in love with them. And I didn't know at first that this is a series, and book 2 is already out. Book 3 is not yet, I don't believe. I think it is supposed to be a trilogy. I think that book 3 is supposed to be the last one. And when I first finished this book originally, I figured like, oh yeah, of course I'm gonna read book 2. I really like this one and I love the characters, so I'd like to spend more time with them. But I actually don't think I'm going to read any of the sequels. I started reading reviews for the second one, and I'm just like, from the sound of this, I'm not gonna like it. So I just don't want to read something that can potentially like ruin these characters that I really enjoyed. Also, the way book 1 ends, like, it's a satisfying ending. You can very, very easily stop just after book 1 and have a complete story. Next, I read Animal Castle Volume 1 by Xavier Dorison and Felix Delep. This is a graphic novel. It originally came out in French in 2019, which I didn't realize till after I'd read it, and this English translation came out December of 2021. The translator is Ivanka, and I'm not sure if I'm going to pronounce this last name correctly, but it's Hanenberger, and I actually gave this 5 stars. And also the cats are playing around in the background, so you might see them running around a bit. So if you couldn't tell already, this is a graphic novel based off of George Orwell's Animal Farm. I have not read Animal Farm, even though I really, really want to. And so I cannot make a comparison between the original and this. There are some reviews of this saying that it's like a cheap knockoff of Animal Farm, but I feel like those people didn't even realize that's what this is supposed to be based on. Like, it says it in the intro. Like, I don't really understand, but I was really blown away by this graphic novel, and it definitely made me want to read the book. The art is very detailed. Like, the art is just so freaking good in this. The color palette supports the story being told. Like, even if I didn't like the story, I would probably still read this just to see the art. The animals here, like, are really brought to life, and you can see the hardships and emotions on their faces and with like their body language. Obviously the story itself isn't new, but I'm enjoying this format of it being told. Like, it's easy to sympathize with the animals. There's a clear divide between like good and evil here. Granted, we do see some of the gray areas, which I thought was interesting. And for me, the most interesting part is the main character, which is a female cat named Miss B. She's the one trying to kind of like organize this revolution. And so it definitely shows like the difficulties of organizing people, staying away from that mob mentality, which is where those like gray area moments come from, and sticking to your morals. Like all of that is explored here. Be prepared going into this though. This is a brutal book. There is obviously death and gore. The opening scene is an execution and it also ends similarly. So there's a lot going on here and it doesn't shy away from those brutal moments. Like violence as a means of control is a major theme here, so you will see that very often. However, I do feel like there is meaning to all of it, and each scene is important to what the animals are going through. Like you see their suffering. The ending of this volume is bittersweet, and it shows how you can play into like the wrong hands, and that just makes me want to pick up the next volume immediately. But this is a series I definitely want to continue, so I will be keeping an eye out on NetGalley for volume 2. Next, I read Little Eyes by Samantha Schweblin. This is sci-fi horror, came out originally in Spanish in 2018, was translated in 2020 into English. The translator is Megan McDowell. I said that a little too fast, and I rated this 3 stars. So by Little Eyes, it's referring to these like Furby-esque creatures called Kentuckys. They are like these little robot things that like everyone is just going crazy over. You can basically choose to be a owner or a dweller. So owners obviously own a Kentucky, and the dwellers are people that control them. The dwellers cannot speak through the Kentucky. They can only watch and control like the creature's movement. And the way these things are described, like even though they're supposed to be all different animals, I can only view them in my head as Furbies. Like they were talking about how they're like football shaped, but like with one end cut off, and I'm like, that's literally the shape of a Furby. So like my brain just cannot get that out of my head. The thing is, the pairings between owners and dwellers, it's completely random. You don't get to choose. You have no idea who you're gonna get. And so the scary part is you do not know who is on the other side of that technology. So my main problem with this book is that there are just straight up way too many POVs. Instead of there being like numbered chapters, each title is a town name. And some of these we only see once. Like the first one is actually South Bend, Indiana, which is only half an hour away from my hometown. So when I saw that, I was like, holy shit, that's cool. But then that was the only time that town ever showed up, and that was also the only US town, I believe, in this book. But some of the POVs pop up several times, but we are like constantly seeing new ones all the way up until the end. And so like sometimes I would get confused over what characters we were talking about right now, and it would take me a few paragraphs to understand who we are talking about, where we are kind of thing. Even with the town names, like it just got too confusing with how many there are. So this first chapter also, since it was so close to home, like literally, it did make this book feel more real for me. The situation in that first chapter is also immediately what you think of when you think of a situation like this. Like that's the first thing that's going to happen. We do get a variety of situations in here. None of them are happy endings. If you know this author, you'll definitely know that going into this. But since there are so many POVs, it does feel like we're viewing these stories from a distance, like maybe from our own Kentuckys kind of thing. I think it would have been more interesting to delve into some of the stories deeper and understand the characters a bit more instead of having so many one-off POVs, because some of them just felt so random and it was like, I don't really care. Like I just wanted to care about the characters more, but there was just straight up too many. We also need to have a sense of disbelief going into this because the whole entire concept is like a security nightmare, and there's no way every single country is going to agree on how this is going to work. So the legality and like the believability of it is just not there. But overall, this one just ended up being an average read for me for the problems I already stated. And also, a lot of the stories, right as they would get interesting, is when the Kentucky's connection would be cut, and it's like, you're just gonna stop there? Like, that's the best part. So it was a bit frustrating to read as well. Next, I read Never Name the Dead by D.M. Rowell. This is a crime mystery book. It comes out November 8th of this year. This was an e-arc. And unfortunately, I gave this 1 star. So this is about a woman who grew up in the Kiowa tribe in Oklahoma, and she has to like return to her roots after she receives like this disturbing phone call from her grandfather. So basically after this phone call, this woman rushes back to Oklahoma and tries to find her grandfather. No one knows where he is. No one can find him anywhere. And in the meanwhile, she's finding out about how all these tribal families have had to like sell their like artifacts, their heirlooms, their paintings to just like survive. And there's like this art dealer guy there that's really sketchy. There's also fracking going on. Like essentially it's just like problem after problem that she's discovering while she's there. Since this is an own voices book, I was so excited to read it. Like the plot sounded interesting, and I'm trying to get more into mysteries in general, so this seemed like a good pick. However, I had to rate it the 1 star, and that star is just for the Kiowa culture because basically this book is a history lesson, but there needs to be a lot more editing done here, and it has nothing to do with like grammar or misspellings or anything like that. It's just that there's a huge abundance of redundant paragraphs throughout this entire book, and it constantly took me out of the story. It really felt like we were just like idling in the same thoughts over and over again instead of moving the plot forward. And this ended up leading me to like just skimming the last few chapters just to get to where something's happening because I was just so over it. But like, for example, you would basically read a paragraph and then right after the character would reiterate those thoughts again, and it would almost, it wasn't exactly like word for word, but it's like, it was like if you were reading a source and then having to like rewrite that information in that source. It was like that, and I'm like, I literally just read this, like keep going, what the hell? I don't think I've ever read a book that has done that before, and it just felt so weird, and it made it so difficult to stay in this freaking story. But this is supposed to be a mystery novel, but there really isn't much salt at the end at all. Like when I turned the last page, I literally shouted like, wait, that's it? Throughout this, there's like 3 plot lines going on, and they're all happening simultaneously, and we learn about all of them right up until the very end of this book. But only one is like officially solved. The other 2, the chick is literally just like, oh, well, I'm gonna deal with this tomorrow. But like the book is over. There is no tomorrow. And so for me, that just made it feel like a good chunk of the book was just completely pointless. Especially the one plot line where it has to do with like her job back home in California, I believe it is. Like she's constantly having to take these phone calls from her work. And there's like this huge issue happening with her partner. And we get no resolution with that at all. It just feels extremely bizarre. And so because of all of that, I had to rate this a 1 star, which never feels good, especially when you're rating an e-arc on NetGalley. Next, I read Tales of Nightmares, Wiley Writers Presents #2. This is edited by Lauren Rhodes. It's a short story collection, all by different authors. And this came out on July 15th of this year, and I gave it 3 stars. So this is just 9 short stories from all different authors following the theme of nightmares. So if you check my review on Goodreads, you can see that I have like a 1-sentence summary of each of them along with my individual ratings for each. But my average rating of these stories is 3.3, which is why I ended up having to rate it 3 on Goodreads. The collection started off very strong for me, and since this is the Wiley Writers #2, I definitely want to check out the first one. And I will be checking out all the subsequent ones as well. I do like that this was kept short with just the 9 stories, because sometimes in short story collections, I feel like I can get overwhelmed quite easily when there's like 20 plus stories in a book, and it also makes it easier to keep track of things. But in this one, I'd only heard of one of the authors before, and so I love short story collections because it always exposes me to new authors that I wouldn't have heard of otherwise, so then I can look up and see their other works and read those. Next, I read The Narrow Cage and Other Modern Fairy Tales. These were written by Vasily Eroshenko and translated by Adam Koplowski. This is fantasy/folklore, comes out March 7th of next year, and I gave this 4 stars. So the major draw of this is because of the author. His life is just insane. Like, I could read a book just on his life, but he was a blind multilingual Esperantist from Ukraine. Like, that is a mouthful. But he basically moved to Japan, joined left-wing circles there, befriended a famous modernist writer in China. And so these stories that he wrote, they're actually originally in Japanese and Esperanto and had to be translated from that. But there's an extended intro that goes a bit more in depth about his life, and I think it is good to read it before reading the stories, because especially the last few, they really talk more about his life, and it's easier to understand those if you've already read the introduction. And it also helps to have more context about what he's writing about. So the tales themselves are just, they're like bizarre, odd, awkward, and amazing all at once. They are very depressing, but how they're written as if they're children's fairy tales, like what you would tell verbally to a child at night. Like that's how they're written. But they have such dark themes, like they are very adult stories, but them being written in this like childish fairy tale way, it just gives it such this odd feeling, and it really helps them to like crawl under your skin and affect you. But due to this, it took me a while to finish this. I would only read like 1 or 2 stories a day. I couldn't just read through all of them. It was just too much depressing things at once. But I really feel like this book lends itself to be read slowly and be savored. Finally, I read Mouthful of Birds. This is also by Samantha Schweblin, just like Little Eyes. It is also translated by Megan McDowell. This is a short story collection though. It came out in 2009 and I gave it 4 stars. So there are 20 short stories in here. And to kind of like compare, like look how tiny that is. Like I think it's just over 200 pages, or not even 200 pages. Yeah, it's just over 200 pages and there's 20 stories in here. And my favorite one in here is only 2 pages long, called Butterflies. Like that thing took me out. So I think this is one of my highest rated short story collections. I definitely feel like they usually end up with average ratings just because there'll be ones that are 5 stars and ones that are like as low as 2 stars kind of thing. And so it usually averages out for that. Since there's 20 in here and they're so freaking short, I did not rate them individually. I did not have an average rating, but I rated this a 4 because there was only several stories in here that I just didn't understand or see the point of or really get. Everything else was pretty amazing, really. So like I just can't imagine that this would even average out to just a 3. What's funny is I've had her first book, Fever Dream, on my TBR for a while now, and one of my favorite booktubers gave it 5 stars. And so that's why she was on my radar. And I didn't realize, like my brain didn't connect the author name until I was at the library picking up Little Eyes. And then I saw these next to each other. And when I pulled this one out, it literally says on the bottom, like, author of Fever Dream. And I was like, oh shit, wait a second. So then when I saw she had a short story collection, I was like, okay, I need to grab that. So even though I wanted to read Fever Dream, I read the other 2 books first. And because of how much I enjoyed the short stories, I'm definitely gonna pick up Fever Dream still. And depending on how I like that, this might be a must-read author for me. Like her stuff is just really interesting and original. And if you're looking for some really just straight up bizarre stories, I would definitely recommend this collection. And that's everything for August. Really not a lot. I just really can't believe how much I read in the beginning compared to the end. I think it's interesting how your mood can change so much when it comes to reading. But as always, thank you for hanging out with me. It is greatly appreciated. And until next time, bonne journée and au revoir.